What's going on, everybody? This is Brian Mazika, Fight Guys, and I'm also a Forbes contributor. And I want to talk a little bit more about Anthony Joshua and Andy Ruiz. The rematch is already been agreed upon. There was a rematch clause in the contract, and on Tuesday, Eddie Hearn tweeted that after meeting with Anthony Joshua and the rest of the Matchroom team, that they've already initiated that their right to order that rematch later this year. So my thought is this: I saw what happened in the first fight. No controversy at all, in my opinion. I think that Joshua was done, and I think it was a really good look for him not to really argue that a lot. But I feel confident that Anthony Joshua will win the rematch, and I think he's going to win it definitively. And I'm going to tell you why. Let's first start off talking about what happened, what went wrong in the first fight. Obviously, if it appears to me, which was pretty obvious, Joshua seemed to take Andy Ruiz a little bit lightly, which is somewhat understandable, and it happens in combat sports quite a bit. You have an initial opponent, and that initial opponent gets replaced for whatever reason, injuries or whatever. In this particular case, Jarrell Miller tested positive for IL-17 and Walgreens. Every single Sudafed, whatever, everything, right? He gets pulled out of the fight, gets replaced by Andy Ruiz. That is a bit of a distraction, right? Happened 6 weeks, I think, before the fight was supposed to take place. That is obviously a bit of a distraction. Then here comes Andy Ruiz, and you look at Andy Ruiz. Yes, he has the one loss on his record. Only loss is a close fight to Joseph Parker. But you look at him, and it is hard to get past the fact that he does not look like a real athlete. That's obvious, right? And you heard most people in the boxing community making reference to that. I knew Andy Ruiz had great hand speed. I knew that he threw, in my opinion, the best combinations of any heavyweight in the division. But I also looked at how short he was. I looked at his lack of reach, and I looked at his body, and I'm like, I don't think he beats Anthony Joshua. But I wasn't as against the concept as many people, because I'd seen him fight and I knew some of the skills he had, and I never thought of Joshua as this just totally incomparable kind of a heavyweight champion. I don't know that even exists anymore at this point, right? So I thought he did take him lightly. I thought he wasn't mentally prepared for him, and I think it showed. I think it showed from a stamina standpoint, and I also think it shows just from the way he put into play his strategy, for lack of a better term, for this fight. Another thing I feel like happened, and this goes into the whole strategy concept, is that I think that Anthony Joshua did not fight tall, right? Joshua was 6'6", Andy Ruiz is 6'2", 4-inch height advantage. I think it was a 6-inch reach advantage. But in the fight, if you notice, Anthony Joshua shrunk himself down into Ruiz's punching range far too often. And when he did that, basically allowing Ruiz to close distance and to fire cleanly from within close proximity. When he did that, he effectively took away his height, took away his own reach advantage. The much smarter approach, and to Rob McCracken's credit, and his corner overall, they were telling Joshua, stay on the end of the jab, stay on the end of the jab. But even when he was throwing the jab in the straight right hand, if you look at the way he bends his knees, he was getting too low and into firing range for Andy Ruiz. There's several different types of jabs that you can throw, and the jab that Joshua should have been throwing was more of a show you jab, as opposed to that committing jab that somewhat gets a little bit shorter, and he would bend his knees a little bit more, and like I said, getting into firing range. The 1-2 combos and movement was primarily what Joshua needed to use to maintain that distance, to frustrate Ruiz, to maybe wear him down, to try to get into that gas tank, which, as it ended up, as it ended up progressing, we saw that Joshua was the one who seemingly wasn't as in good of condition as he needed to be. But those are the reasons that he lost his fight. I think he wasn't mentally prepared, and I think from a strategic standpoint, he did not fight tall. The reason I think he beats Ruiz in this rematch is because all of those things are correctable. Obviously, there's no way in the world that you should be taking a fighter or an opponent lightly who dropped you 4 times and took all of your titles. So if he's still taking Ruiz lightly at this point, then he probably is in the wrong sport. So I don't think that that's going to happen. Ruiz has more than earned his respect. So that should eliminate that part. Doesn't mean he automatically wins, but he at least should be in the right mental state for the rematch. Secondly, fighting tall for Joshua should not be that big of a problem. Okay, like I said, you stay on the end of the jab, right hand, mix it up a little bit here and there, but you don't have to start uncorking true power shots, hooks and uppercuts until you've seen a little bit of slowdown from Ruiz. You gotta get to the point where you can somewhat neutralize that hand speed. And where is Ruiz most effective? He's most effective on the inside, firing those combinations. That left hook is his best punch. Joshua really needs to borrow a page out of Vladimir Klitschko's book. Vladimir Klitschko had some very similar shortcomings early on in his career. Got knocked out 3 times by Ross Purity, Corey Sanders, and Layman Brewster. Got with Emmanuel from Kronk Gym, and they were able to iron out most of those problems. And it got to the point where Klitschko was able to protect that questionable chin, which you also have to say that Anthony Joshua has at this point. And he was able to craft a style and a strategy that worked for him physically and his overall gifts. And it also helped to restore his confidence in himself, which is something that I think that Joshua is going to have to do. So one thing that Klitschko got a lot of flack for, but it was a winning style, was tying up his opponents on the inside. And I think that's something that Joshua absolutely has to do, especially against Andy Ruiz. Joshua has to jab, right hand, jab, right hand, jab, right hand, jab, right hand. Alternate that style back and forth. But when Ruiz does get inside, if he does close that distance, immediately Joshua has to tie those arms up. He's got to tie the arms up. If he ties the arms up, he'll be able to somewhat neutralize and frustrate Ruiz, because he won't be able to get off the shots where he needs to get them off. You want Ruiz getting frustrated from the outside and lunging in and essentially leaving himself open for hard counter right hands as he tries to close the distance. Joshua was essentially closing the distance for him, especially after he thought he had him hurt. Well, he definitely did have him hurt in the 3rd, but he had whacked him really good in the 7th round, got careless, and got caught again. So he has to be patient, tie up the arms, work behind the jab and the right hand, and if he does that, he will not only beat Andy Ruiz in the rematch, he'll probably knock him out. So losing doesn't mean as much as it appears to mean to some people. Like, a lot of people have this thought in their head that once the fighter's going undefeated for a certain amount of time and he takes that first loss, it just ruins him. It does not have to ruin a fighter. We've seen too many people like Klitschko. Klitschko, like I said, lost those 3 fights. After he lost to Layman Brewster, he didn't lose another fight for 11 years. Literally, for 11 years. Until he ran up against Tyson Fury, seemed to be demotivated, lost by decision, and then of course he lost his next fight to Anthony Joshua, got stopped, and then retired. So if there's a tweak that can be made on Anthony Joshua's side that leads to an 11-year win streak, I think that that's something that they definitely need to explore. I think it's something that can happen. But my prediction is, when this rematch does take place, I think Anthony Joshua wins it, and I think he wins it definitively. That's all I got for you. Appreciate you watching as always. God bless and peace.